Jasmine Sturr.
Hi Jasmine, can you tell me a little bit about your diagnosis with Parkinson's, please?
Okay, my diagnosis was more complicated than I think a lot of people's, although less complicated than some. I was 14 when I had symptoms. I first felt it as a pain in my leg, in my foot, in my ankle, on my left leg. And I remember I was sitting in English class when this happened, in my freshman English class, and I was trying to figure out, it just felt different than anything I'd ever felt in my life before. And it didn't go away, it got worse, and I started having different sensitivities in my leg, different pain in my leg. I started having difficulty walking. And eventually, within a month or two, it had progressed to where I was in both legs, and I was having a really hard time walking and moving. I was very slow, very rigid. I had been a pretty active person before that, so it was pretty unusual. I started seeing a neurologist, and we couldn't figure it out. And by the time I was finally diagnosed at 18, my first diagnosis was dopa-responsive dystonia, which I'll get a little more into that in a sec. But my symptoms when I was at 18, it was pretty much full body. I had rigidity in almost every joint. Bradykinesia was a huge issue. It was just, like 80-year-olds would walk past me in the aisles of grocery stores. It was pretty sad. And I never had a very bad tremor. I was always more of the very rigid slow. It was almost the lack of motion as opposed to too much motion was more of my issue. I would get the worst issue I had. I'd get these spasms in my eyes. I was like dystonia and the muscles controlling my eyes, which were the most problematic because it looks like you're having a seizure, but you're conscious. So you're like, I'm fine. Like I just look like I'm having a seizure. It's super fun to explain to people. But I was at first, and my neurologist. I found this really great neurologist who was the first person to say, I don't know what you have, but I know you have something, and we're not going to give up on you. And so I went back to him right after. I always say everything happens to me in October. It was October of 2012. I had just turned 18. And my ankle had twisted in really badly. It was pronated at about 80 degrees. And that made my doctor, how much worse the pronation had gotten made my doctor think to try Cinemet. And so he gave me Cinemet, and within a couple weeks, I could move again in ways that I hadn't in years. It was my first year at the university, and I had been there about a month. And I went to school, and with my prescription, I came back 2 weeks later to visit my parents. My dad asked me, like, how are you feeling? I said, I was a little bit in denial, like, I don't want to believe this, but, like, look. And so I laid down on a bed, and I could lift my leg up, like, pretty easily, whereas before, if I had tried to lift my leg up more than 2 inches, it would just shake, and it would get so stiff it was a huge struggle to lift it 2 inches off a bed, and here I could just, like, lift my leg 2 feet in the air. And so I was diagnosed with dopa-responsive dystonia, which is a mimic to Parkinson's. It typically affects children. It's a metabolic error in dopamine, and people with dopa-responsive dystonia are stable on their medication for a long time. They can take Parkinson's medication for 20, 30 years and still be doing well on it. Except I progressed on Cinemet. It kind of kept needing more and more, and we're a little in denial, like, maybe I just have a really nasty case of this. We just haven't figured out my dose yet. And then it got to the point where I was taking, by the time I turned 20, same month, it was like the last week of October that I got dyskinesia 2 years later. At that point, I was taking 6 Levodopa and 1 Azilect, and I got dyskinesia. And that was sort of the start of a big downhill slope. But that was the point, when I got the dyskinesia, was the point where they said, you definitely just have Parkinson's. So, yeah.
Blimey. You would not expect Parkinson's at 14, would you? You just wouldn't.
I didn't expect it. Yeah, we didn't expect it. So I'm definitely not the only one. There's been a couple of us. I want to say I know maybe 10, 15 people now who've had it in their teens.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
definitely, you hear about it more. I think people are sort of either getting diagnosed with it or they're coming out and talking about it. So there's more
yeah, I think it's a little
awareness.
bit of both. It's
Yeah,
definitely a little bit of both. I think it's being diagnosed a lot faster, which is good. Um, because, I think that my 4 years was way too long to get diagnosed.
yeah.
And a lot of my friends who are about my age are in the 8 year, 7 to 8 year to get diagnosed range,
Wow.
which is just, and then
It's a long
Sarah
time not
was,
knowing, isn't it?
huh?
It's a long time not knowing what you're dealing with.
It's a long time not knowing. I mean, 4 years not knowing was maddening, especially because the doctors, a lot of neurologists kind of have a god complex, and their answer as soon as they run out of answers is it's your head and it's psychosomatic, which is really unhelpful.
Yeah, that's not what you need.
So yeah,
It
it's
doesn't
like
help
thanks. I'm
anyone.
pretty sure it's not, but
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I'll be honest
so,
with you. When I first met you, I was in Portland at the World Parkinson's Congress, and I was very naive in my Parkinson's at this point, and I assumed that you were there with someone with Parkinson's because
mhm.
I'd never really met anyone that didn't, to me, have any symptoms that I associated with Parkinson's, and it was actually I felt quite ridiculous as someone with Parkinson's not knowing that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's kind of funny. My dad is in his 50s, and I was with him, and I was thinking, like, everyone's gonna think he's the one who has Parkinson's. He's got gray hair and everything. So,
yeah, but it's crazy that even within the community we're still learning, because
mhm.
you get diagnosed and you assume that what you have is kind of the traditional Parkinson's, and there is no traditional Parkinson's. There's so many different
That's true. There's no traditional Parkinson's.
types. I mean, literally, if you stood everyone that I've interviewed so far, probably I'm trying to think maybe say like 20, 30 people with Parkinson's, and the people that I'm yet to interview, if you stood them all in a row, there would be different symptoms
Yeah,
between all
no,
those people. And
yeah.
again, if you multiplied it again and again and again, probably hundreds of people, you'd still get different symptoms.
They call it a snowflake disease, right?
Yeah, makes it sound beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, right. So
Oh,
pretty.
thanks.
Nope. Yeah. No, it is really interesting. One time I sat down and I listed all of the symptoms that I could think of. And it was a pretty exhausted list. I think there were 27 different
Oh,
symptoms that I could think of, and I'm sure I missed something.
crikey.
Um, and if you think about the fact that every one of us has some combination of
Yeah,
these 27 with some
yeah.
in higher,
And that everyone
like I
thinks
had
that
more.
Parkinson's is just a tremor, the
Yeah, I didn't
outside
get a
world
tremor for a
think.
couple of years. Um, and even now, my tremors is my hands are still thanks to DS, but even then, my tremor is probably maybe like that much of a wobble. Um, my tremor is pretty mild,
Yeah.
um,
I think
but
actually I kind of am slightly grateful for my tremor in a weird way because it's a real visual cue that there's something wrong with me and people are more kind of patient perhaps with me because they can see that I'm struggling. I think the problem
yeah,
with Parkinson's when you're rigid or stiff or what have you, it's a little bit more difficult to have those kind of visual cues, I think.
yeah. I wore an ankle brace on my leg for a while before I had the DBS because I just couldn't walk. I couldn't walk flat on my foot, and so the ankle brace kept me safe walking. It kept me from tripping over my foot. And I remember when I first got it, I was a little bit conscious of the fact that all of a sudden I felt like everyone could see the disability, and then I was like, this is so nice.
Yeah, it makes it easier.
I was like, oh, now people aren't just like wondering why I'm struggling to do something. They
Yeah.
like assume that there's some underlying disability there, which is like
I'm
kind
the
of a
same with my
weird.
neck, definitely. I mean, for the first bit of time, I didn't really need the neck brace, but it was just something to kind of be like, something going on here, you know.
Like you're not just like pretending to
Everyone
like
thinks I'm on
stare.
my
You're not just like
phone all the
super
time.
awkward.
Everyone thinks I'm on my phone when they like talk to me. They're like, "Oh, sorry, you're on your phone." I'm like, "No, I'm not.
You're like, I wish I was on
My
my
phone's in
phone.
my hand. I don't have two phones."
Buy a Bluetooth for God's sake.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
So, are you able to sum up in a few words what having PD at such a young age felt like to you?
Yeah. Well, I think that by the time I was finally diagnosed with Parkinson's, I was so past the point of shock, because it was 6 years into it.
Yeah,
Um, but I think more than the diagnosis of Parkinson's, but the realization that something was really, really wrong and it wasn't going to get better. A couple months into being sick, um, it was kind of like everything I knew changed,
Yeah.
and every all of the ways I lived my life and all the ways I did things had to change, because they weren't going to work the same.
Yeah.
And so it's like I felt like I almost had to rebuild my entire life from scratch.
Yeah.
Um,
That's an incredible thing to have to do at such a young age when you're still really forming who you are, if you think about it.
yeah, and this is something I sort of talked about recently. I was a singer. I was training competitive singing, and I wanted to be an opera singer. And I lost my voice very early on. And in a really weird way, it was towards the end of my first year of high school. So I was 14, and then when I was 15, starting my second year, I was kind of just like, well, I literally just lost everything I thought I wanted to do with my life.
God.
And because I lost that, I was in this place I had an amazing art teacher and an amazing chemistry teacher, which are like the two things that I do now. I went to college for chemistry, and then I just create stuff as it's my creative outlet.
Yeah.
Artistic and crafty pursuits are my creative outlet, because I feel like you can't just do science without having something to keep you going insane. You can't just have Parkinson's without something to keep you from going insane. So, a double there. But I found, I needed, especially losing singing, I needed that creative outlet. And I had this amazing art teacher who just kind of taught me how to see things and how to be creative. And then I had this chemistry teacher who was incredible and who really saw that I was good at it and that I was enjoying it and really fostered that. And because of those two people, I had the confidence to go off to college and to go try out the world and to think that I could succeed. And so I was really lucky to be in that place where I was having those people. But that's I think the one advantage to having it so young was that my idea of who I wasn't super solid yet.
Yeah.
I mean, the disadvantage was it was kind of, it was really hard to be going through those really formative years and to have something so huge, and something that was, I feel like, and Parkinson's is just a continual trauma, it's like one thing after the other.
It keeps on giving.
It's a gift that keeps on giving. Yeah, it really is. But yeah, that's I guess that's feel about having it at this young age.
You vlog from time to time as well about having PD. I've seen some of your vlogs.
Yeah, I vlog, I blog a bit. That very much, I think it was after I had deep brain stimulation surgery, which I had in June 2015. After my DBS, my neurosurgeon said this to me. He said that you're one of the few people who's had this at a young enough age and with a scientific background to where you can talk about this from a perspective that nobody else has. And that really stuck with me because I realized that there was something missing out there that I felt like I was sort of in a unique place to fill, and that I could take science and digest it down to patients, because so much of my own getting through Parkinson's has been through knowledge, through learning everything that there was about science and Parkinson's and continuing to study it. That gave me the ability to dialogue and interface with medical professionals in a new way that somebody who doesn't know the basics of how their medication work just can't do.
Yeah.
And I felt like there's nothing out there that was really sharing it in a way. So one of the projects I set out to do was to do some Parkinson's education videos, which I've done a couple of, and I'm going to keep doing. I have some new topics I want to keep doing, but then also talking about some of the real things. I've talked about what it's like to be on the inside of DBS surgery, because the one thing nobody told me was how I was going to feel when they were drilling a cage into my head.
Yeah. I really want to know. I'm going to watch that because it's something I'm so intrigued about, because everyone says, "Oh, you're awake for it," and I'm like, "What is that like?"
It's well, for me, it it's a mixed bag. On one hand, it's such a cool thing
Yeah.
for me. Like, I'm just super fascinated by that kind of stuff. And the way I got through it personally was by knowing the science, it became something that I studied and something that I was like emotionally detached from. Like, the
No.
surgeon was, I was just like, right now you're peeling back my meninges. And he
Oh.
actually stopped and he was just like, how do you, he's like, that is what I'm doing. Like, how do you know that? I was like, I read the technical manual before the surgery. Because of course I did.
You probably
Um,
completely creeped him out. He was like, yes.
yeah, it's like really funny. And I had this neurosurgeon he was incredible and he was so down to earth and he was just like, I put these in people all the time, like, and I have no idea how they work on like a chemical level. And I was like, well, let me tell you about the quantum mechanics of cell
Amazing.
depolarization. It's like we're having this conversation about like cell voltage potentials as he's like, you
So
know,
funny.
drilling into my head. Um, but there's some weird feelings. There's some very weird feelings in it, and it's very surreal. Um, and it's an experience unlike any other experience. The one thing that I love is that I got to feel the moment that my body started to work again,
Yeah, I've heard other people
which
say that.
is a moment that I will hold forever. Is that they were trying they the moment he got it right was like it was like an aha moment for my body. It was like my arm was like locked like here. My hands were like claws and my arm was just stuck. Because they also have you off meds for a whole day before.
Oh,
Like I
fun.
was barely walking into the building. I think I was just so determined to walk into the building.
I will get there if I have to crawl.
Yeah, them putting the bracelet on me, I was just like, because I had to give the nurse my arm, and I was like, okay, like trying to grab it to drag it. And she was like, are you okay? And I was like, why are you asking me that? I'm gonna have brain surgery. Like, no, I'm not
No, you're not.
okay. But the moment it worked, it was like all of a sudden I was like, they were like, I was like, whoa, like, hey, arm, like
I'm a
you can do this.
butterfly.
Yeah, and they were like, point to the anesthesiologist, and I was like, he's over there. Like,
I'm not
and they had me
operating on
tapping
my
my
mind
ankle, and it
anymore.
was just this uncoordinated mess, and I was just like, I can tap my ankle. Like,
Wow.
everything was so exciting.
It's like
It was
being a
like feeling all
child, isn't
these new
it?
things. Yeah, it's pretty. That's the one thing that I think like that's what makes it worth it in my mind.
It's like
I'm
childbirth, I
like,
imagine.
is it what?
It's like childbirth, I imagine. You go through all the kind of pain and the kind of stress of it, but then you
Yeah,
have this
right,
like
right. And then
awesome
you get
thing
the
at the end
baby,
of
and
it.
you're like, yeah, at least the baby is, yeah. At least you got that after all that misery. It kind of
Yeah.
was. Although then they turn it too high because they want to test kind of like the voltage
Oh
limits.
God.
And for me and everyone, that's the thing about DBS is it's everyone feels different weird sensations. Like every time they program mine, I feel like a twitch in my fourth and fifth finger.
How weird.
Um, yeah, it's so strange. Every time they change the programs for a little bit and then it goes away. But like when they turned it up, I felt heavy. All of a sudden, I felt like my arm. I was pointing my to the anesthesiologist, and my arm just dropped, and my leg and my face dropped, and like because they did it half the time, my face dropped, and I was just like, I literally asked. I said, did I have a stroke? Like that's what I thought. I thought I was having a stroke, and he was just like, no, don't worry. Like we just turned it up because we wanted to see to the point where it was too high, and I was like,
Yeah,
well,
we
it's
now
too
know that
high.
it's too high. We'll take it back
This is
down.
the point. So after the initial amazement, they kind of did that up, off, up, off, on, and two for a little bit. So that was a little bit weird, but
Wow.
yeah, it's an experience. Are you thinking about DBS surgery or?
Maybe for the future, I think I'm probably going to need something to rectify this sort
Yeah,
of fiasco. So, I mean, I'm open to it. Whatever my consultant thinks is best, really. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was when I had it. It was kind of like it needed to happen.
yeah.
My symptoms were so bad. They were so bad. I was getting to the point where I was having a hard time getting out of bed on my own.
Wow.
Um, so it was kind of just like if I want to be functional at all, that
That's
needed to
amazing.
happen.
That's amazing that it can be so effective.
Yeah, it was so effective. It was like it was. I mean, it's night and day. It's
It's incredible.
it's really it's really crazy. Like it's got. I mean, it's at the point where my programmer doesn't even when she tweaks it, she doesn't turn it off anymore. She's just like I don't even want to see it. Like we know it's bad. So she did it once, and she was just like, "I'm never turning this off again."
I
Okay.
remember when I was first diagnosed, someone kindly sent me a video to show me deep brain stimulation because they were like, "Look at this, this will help you in the future," and
Right, and then you read about it, you're like, they cut your head
it
open?
terrified me. But at the same time, I was like, "This is amazing!" Like to see someone
Yeah.
turn it on and off, like on themselves, was just like,
Yeah. Well, they say that deep brain stimulation surgery takes about 2 years to get comfortable with the idea because it's so weird. Like
yeah.
it's the weirdest concept. I want to know who the hell the first person was who ever did this.
I'm gonna try.
Like,
I'll try and find them and interview them.
right? Can you imagine the first person back in 1998 who was like, "Yeah, you want to stick these electrified rods in my
Sure,
head and turn them on
go
and
for
see
it.
what happens?" Oh, I mean, it's crazy, but it's like I remember I went to a presentation about 2 years before I had the surgery, and they passed around the electrodes and the leads, and I said, "Oh hell no!" I was like, "No way, no way, no way! I never ever want to do that
And then I
ever."
suppose you get to a point where you literally can't move and you're in bed and
Yeah,
it's
when they
like,
when
this
they
can help
took me
me.
back for surgery, I was like, "Please cut my head open,
Yeah, anything.
please save this nightmare."
Maybe they can take
Um,
my head off and I can put it under my arm like one of those like old-fashioned ghosts from like history. Like
those
I'd be
are
able
those
to see
Halloween
better
costumes.
probably.
Yeah, they can tilt your head the right way.
Yeah, it'd be great. Let's do that.
So,
So we met
yeah,
in Portland at the World Parkinson's Congress, and I love the World Parkinson's Congress, but I also love the Parkinson's community because
it's
it's
great.
such an incredible community. What does it mean to you to be part of that community?
I felt really alone before my diagnosis, and actually, um, dope responsive dystonia was the first community I ever became a part of because that was my first diagnosis, and it was a Facebook group that I found. And all of a sudden, it was like I'm not alone in the world. Like
Mm,
there's other people who have similar problems, and I hadn't really figured out. And I mean, this was 2012, where I feel like that was kind of the time when like Facebook groups and different communities were finally like really emerging.
yeah,
Because before that, I mean, I think I found an old form of theirs a couple years prior. Had been on different forums, but I feel like Facebook just really enabled these communities to really form. But between not having an actual diagnosis and like kind of that lack of that technology, I didn't really have a community when I wasn't diagnosed. And those years just felt really, really isolating. I didn't really feel like. I mean, I had amazing friends who were still super supportive and who are still my friends today, but they didn't really understand what I was going through. And all of a sudden, I found all these people who had really similar experiences. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then the other side of the community that having gotten more and more involved in the Parkinson's community that I found is that I really love having done some vlogging and blogging and making videos and stuff is that I really sort of see the privileges that I've had having been able to study science and having been able to to understand this and to have been able to have this surgery and to do different things. I really feel like obligated to share with the community because so much of them sharing is how I got
yeah.
to where I am. And so I really feel that sort of that need to kind of give that back because I feel like they've given so much to me, and that they're so supportive.
So
Um,
supportive.
like
I
they're
totally didn't
supportive
expect
of
it.
everything. Yeah, I mean, when I graduated from college it was a huge, when I graduated, it was my first, there's 8 semesters total. My first 5 semesters were like, I was still sort of functioning. And then at the end of October is when I got sick. Hang on, my computer needs to be plugged in. Let me just grab the cord. Yeah, I got sick towards the end of my 5th semester, and so when I when that happened, I it was like the next 3 semesters I had the two DBS procedures and a feeding tube put
Wow.
in. So the gastric complications of Parkinson's hit me really hard. And they were just so rocky the last 3 semesters that when I graduated, it was like, oh my god, I graduated. Like,
Yeah.
I was able to finish this. It was a huge deal. And they, like, there were so many people with Parkinson's who my graduation was kind of like their celebration too.
No.
Like, they were all, everyone was like celebrating this with me, and it really felt like, I felt like this was an accomplishment that we kind of all shared. It was really
That's so
incredible. And I feel
lovely.
like every time somebody has a big joy, like a big thing that they've done, like, we all got to be happy with them.
Exactly that.
Um,
And I never expected that because I've never had that in any other circle. There's always been
it's unlike any other
competitiveness and,
place.
sort of infighting and people being jealous of people. And there's none of that. Everyone is so happy for each other when they get some sort of.
Yeah, like, any drama is stupid. Like, it's just stupid things that, and it doesn't mean anything, and it's like, we really are. I feel like we cry together and we celebrate together.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. That's really nice.
it's really lovely.
So, in your time having PD, have you kind of picked up any little tips or tricks or anything like that that you'd love to share with someone that's just been diagnosed?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I could ever tell anybody who's been diagnosed, and sometimes newly diagnosed people contact me, and I think they're very overwhelmed because
Yeah, rightly so.
it's like so much information coming at you at once. Like, it's totally an overwhelming thing.
Mm,
Um, and I think my biggest advice is just to take a deep breath and say, like, okay, I don't have to conquer this all in a day,
yeah,
and to just learn as much as you can, because I think the more knowledge you have is the more power you have. Like,
yeah,
know your options, learn how your medication works, learn what's out there, because that gives you so much more power.
yeah,
It gives you control that you don't have from this disease. And and I think it's a combination of balancing all of the good and the bad. I also like to tell people, my symptoms are pretty extreme. I'm a fairly extreme example. Like, I'm totally not. I'm not the usual. So
Oh,
don't
any of us
be
the
afraid.
usual.
Yeah, that is true. But it's kind of just like, I'm like, 10 years in, you could still be doing okay.
Yeah,
And you might not be, but it's so out of your control.
yeah,
Like, whatever's going to happen symptom-wise is going to happen symptom-wise. You
yeah,
can be prepared for it by knowing what's going to happen. And also, I think there's a huge amount of acceptance that comes with PD, and that's a slow process.
yeah,
And there'll be those overwhelming moments of, like, my life is falling apart and everything is awful. And my other, I think, advice to people would just be to, like, you really have to let yourself feel those, and to, like, you are losing something when you have PD. I think there's an amount of grieving you have to do for the life you thought you were going to live.
yeah,
But, at the same time, I think that celebrating the community is the best advice I can give, because it's really an incredible community. And it's one I feel really fortunate to be part of, in a weird, twisted way. It's like, we're all here because we have a horrible disease, but at the same time, like, I wouldn't know all these people if I didn't have Parkinson's, and we wouldn't have that. It's the crappy gel that holds us all together.
the crappy gel.
Also, develop a morbid sense of humor.
Yeah,
Help you through a lot of things.
that's amazing.
Sometimes you have to be willing to laugh when you're like, when you've laid on the ground for 6 hours waiting for somebody to come home, like, to help you up.
You're
Like,
like,
there's just horrible
everything's
things
normal.
that
It's
happen.
fine.
Yeah, you're like, okay, well, I'm on the floor. This is just great. Like, but it's like, laugh at it afterwards.
The floor
It's kind
becomes your friend, I think. You have to embrace the floor.
of, oh yeah, the floor, it catches you anytime you fall,
Yeah.
right?